Mama, if he didn't start a war, why are all those cameras waiting for him? Ivy Quinn asked it with her hood slipping off and rain caught in her eyelashes, as if the whole morning had leaned down just to hear what her mother would say. She stood on the courthouse steps in a red coat that had once belonged to another child in another family, one Mara had never finished building. In Ivy's mittened hand was a paper star from school, the gold foil already curling at the corners. Mara fixed the hood without answering right away. The answer was standing on every screen in the city. Commander Noah Vale, decorated officer of the Atlantic Orbital Fleet, had crossed the alien border with one unauthorized fleet 3 months earlier. The headlines had called him reckless, proud, dangerous. The larger ones had called him the man who nearly taught the sky how to burn. Ivy looked past her mother's shoulder toward the line of reporters. They don't wait like that for teachers, she said. No, Mara murmured. They don't. A bell rang somewhere above the square. Not a church bell. The courthouse bell, old and flat and serious. It made the pigeons shudder off the railing and lifted the rain smell from the stone. Mrs. Alvarez came hurrying under a black umbrella, her school scarf half untied, cheeks pink from the cold. I've got her, she said softly. The children are already on the bus. We'll go straight to St. Luke's for rehearsal. Ivy didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the cameras. Mama. Mara knelt so their faces were close. School first. Nativity rehearsal. Then I'll come. What if the judge sent him away before that? Mara's fingers paused at Ivy's collar. Why would that matter to you? Ivy glanced down at the paper star. Because he looks lonely in the pictures. Mrs. Alvarez stepped closer without pretending not to hear. Children noticed the things adults spent years editing out of themselves. Mara kissed Ivy's forehead and rose too quickly, like the stone steps had tilted. Go with Mrs. Alvarez. Ivy did, but only after turning once more toward the court, toward the dark car at the curb, just as its rear door opened. Men in coats moved first, then officers, then Noah himself, handcuffs removed, but wrists still red where they had been. He stepped into the rain bareheaded. For one strange second, the noise lowered instead of rising. Cameras still flashed. Microphones still reached. Yet the whole scene seemed to fold inward around him, because grief, when carried properly, had a way of silencing even greed. He had more gray at the temples than the last time Mara had stood this close. He lifted his eyes, found her immediately, and stopped. Mrs. Alvarez gently guided Ivy toward the bus before the child could turn and see the look on her mother's face. Inside, the courtroom smelled of damp wool, polished wood, and that old paper scent that made every judgment feel older than the people receiving it. Mara took her seat behind the defense rail only because the clerk had asked, and because Noah's lead counsel was still stuck in traffic on the flooded South Bridge. Judge Helena Ortega opened the file and adjusted her glasses low on her nose. Commander Noah Elias Vale, she said, you are charged with unauthorized military incursion beyond the Orin Accord line, violation of treaty restraint, concealment of mission purpose, and conduct likely to provoke interspecies conflict. Noah stood. He wore civilian black, though the straightness in him still belonged to uniform. There was a small white scar near his chin Mara did not remember. She hated that there were years on his face she had not witnessed arrive. Do you understand the charges? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. His voice was lower now. Not older exactly. Deeper in the places life had used it. Across the aisle, Special Prosecutor Daniel Reeve rose with a sort of neat confidence that had probably been expensive to educate. The state will show that Earth sent no diplomatic mission, no rescue request, no medical convoy. It sent one fleet across a forbidden line. One fleet is enough to start a war. Noah didn't look at him. The phrase traveled through the courtroom like a match near dry paper. Reporters wrote it down as if it had been waiting for them. Earth sent no diplomatic mission. One fleet was enough. Mara lowered her eyes to the documents in front of her and saw her own handwriting on the top page. She had drafted part of the original Orin Accord 10 years earlier, when treaties still felt like things careful people could keep alive with commas and patience. Back then, Noah had sat across from her in rooms with no windows, arguing that peace meant making the other side feel safe, not simply making them obey. He had smiled less than other men. He had listened more. By Christmas that year, she had known the sound of his footsteps in the hallway before she knew what she would do with the rest of her life. The judge turned toward Mara. Ems, Quinn, until counsel arrives. I understand you are prepared to address the treaty interpretation issue. Prepared was not the word. Corner was closer. But she stood anyway because standing was what people did when old choices came back dressed as legal procedure. Yes, Your Honor. Noah looked at her then, not with surprise. Something quieter. Something more dangerous because it had survived time. The first hour moved like cold water. Reeves spoke cleanly, piece by piece. Radar logs, border beacons, voice records. Noah had taken the 4th Humanitarian Escort Fleet past the Accord line by 11 minutes and 27 seconds. He had refused to disclose cargo even when Earth Command demanded it. He had transmitted a single coded message, then gone silent. What weapons were aboard? The judge asked. We suspect tactical capability, Reeves said. Suspect? Judge Ortega repeated. The commander deleted manifest visibility before departure. Noah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. When it was Mara's turn, she placed both palms on the table because her hands had begun to remember other winters. The treaty prohibits armed penetration of the Oran border, she said. It does not prohibit emergency humanitarian transit if loss of life is immediate and if hostile systems remain inactive. Reeve gave a small smile. If humanitarian. Mara met it evenly. Yes, if. Then perhaps, he said, the commander would like to explain why he crossed without filing emergency notice. The whole room turned to Noah. He could have spoken. Mara knew the angle of his throat when words were waiting there. Instead, he said, I cannot disclose the protected subject at this time. Protected subject, not cargo, not weapons, something living, then. Reeve pounced on the hesitation like a man who had polished his shoes for exactly this moment. The court should note that the defendant continues to hide material facts under a self-created veil of secrecy. Judge Ortega wrote something down. Her face gave away nothing. When the recess was called, Mara stayed seated until the room thinned. She gathered her papers carefully, the way people did when they needed their hands occupied so their hearts would not embarrass them in public. She had almost reached the side corridor when Noah said her name, not loud. That made it worse. Mara. She stopped with one hand on the stone archway. Rain tapped at the tall windows nearby. Somewhere down the corridor, a copier word, ordinary and rude. He came no closer than courtesy required. You look tired. She let out the smallest laugh. That's what you say after 8 years. It was the safest option. She turned then. You always did choose those. A shadow of the old smile touched his mouth, then went away. I heard you left treaty office. I did. For private practice? For breathing. That one landed. She saw it in his eyes. He noticed the red glitter on her sleeve from Ivy's school costume and glanced at the folded paper sticking from her file. You have a child. It was not a question, but he waited like it might become one. Mara slid the school notice deeper into the folder. That isn't your business. His answer came slower than his hurt. No, I suppose it wouldn't be. Someone called for him from the holding room. He stepped back. Mara, he said again, and she hated that her name still sounded like something he'd been careful with. What are you protecting? His eyes held hers for one long beat. A child. Then he was gone. At St. Luke's, the children stood in 2 uneven lines beneath paper angels and strings of white lights that flickered whenever the old heating system coughed. Ivy wore a cardboard halo for half a rehearsal before giving it to a smaller boy who kept crying because his had torn. Mrs. Alvarez tapped the piano and tried again. From the top, please. No racing through Bethlehem like it's a fire drill. The children began their carol in a dozen uncertain keys. Ivy sang softly, then stopped midway through the second verse and raised her hand. Miss? Yes, Ivy? If someone breaks a rule because a baby is sick, is it still bad? Half the room giggled because children laughed whenever anyone said sick. Mrs. Alvarez set down her pencil. That depends on the rule. What if it's a big rule? The teacher studied her. Did someone tell you about a big rule? Ivy looked at the floor. No, I heard it. Mrs. Alvarez walked over and crouched by her. Sometimes grown-ups don't get to choose between good and bad. Sometimes it's bad and worse. And afterward, a judge helps decide what to call it. Ivy considered this the way only children could, with full seriousness and no performance. That sounds lonely. Yes, Mrs. Alvarez said. It can. By late afternoon, the rain had deepened instead of passing. Water slid down courthouse windows in crooked silver lines. Mara sat alone on a bench outside the records room with a coffee she had stopped drinking 20 minutes earlier. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Alvarez. Rehearsal done. Ivy asked if you'll make church lighting tonight. I said probably. Probably. The word mothers used when they were trying not to promise anything that could break a child. A clerk approached carrying a sealed archive sleeve. M's. Quinn, this was recovered from Fleet Intelligence evidence. It references your name. The judge ordered disclosure for counsel review. Mara frowned. My name? The clerk handed it over and left. Inside the sleeve was a smaller envelope, yellowed at the edges, her address written in Noah's careful hand. There was a second envelope beneath it. Never sent, addressed from her to him. Official transit stamp across the flap. Return to sender. Communications blackout. Her breath caught so sharply the coffee trembled over her knuckles. She opened hers first. No, if you are reading this before Christmas, don't come home with expensive gifts. I already have one. We're going to be a father. A sonogram print was folded inside, the image blurred and grainy and wholly in the way all first evidence of love looked. At the bottom she had written, with a happiness so young it hurt to recognize, 3 stockings this year. Come back to us. The bench, the hallway, the rain, the whole building seemed to tip. She had said it 9 days before his deployment crossed into blackout. He had never received it. Her fingers shook so badly she almost tore the second letter trying to open it. Noah's was shorter. Mara, if the border talks delay me again, don't let your mother bully you into using the plastic tree. The real one leans left, and you always say imperfect things photograph better. I bought the silver star you liked in the church market. I'm bringing it home. Wait for me. No. Mara pressed the paper to her mouth because there were too many people nearby to let grief make a sound. When Noah entered the consultation room for the closed review, she was standing by the window with both letters in hand. He saw her face and did not ask permission first. What happened? She held out the envelope. He took it. Read. Did not move. She watched the moment arrive in him. Not like lightning. Lightning was clean. This was slower, crueler. A whole life unbuilt in the space between one line and the next. You're going to be a father. His lips parted, but no words came. He read it again. Mara, I thought you knew and left anyway. He looked up as if the room had struck him. I thought you changed your mind. Your calls stopped. The messages were cut. Then I heard you left my apartment and taken your things. I was pregnant and terrified. I would have come back. You didn't know. No. He sat down because suddenly he had to. The letter remained open in his hand like something alive and fragile. No, I didn't. Rain tapped the window harder. After a long time, he asked, How old? 7. He nodded once, eyes lowered, not trusting himself with more. Boy or girl? Girl. Another pause. What's her name? Mara almost smiled through the ache of it. Ivy. Noah closed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not broken, just stripped. Does she know about me? She knows there was someone I loved. She knows he was gone before she was born. I never knew if that was a kindness or a lie. He pressed the heel of his hand to his mouth, thinking, failing not to feel. Does she look like you? She argues like you. That finally drew a breath from him that might once have been laughter. He folded the letter with extraordinary care and handed it back. Is she safe? Mara stared at him. That's what you ask first. It has to be. Something in her gave way then, not all at once, but enough to let the years stop standing between them like armed men. She's safe, she whispered. She asks too many questions. She sings off key, unless she's tired. She hates peas. She thinks judges must be lonely. Noah's eyes glistened. He looked away toward the rain-washed glass, because there are some joys that hurt too much to meet directly. Judge Ortega reconvened the hearing at dusk. The courtroom lights came on one row at a time, soft gold against dark wood. Outside, the square had begun hanging Christmas lanterns despite the weather. In the gallery, umbrellas dripped under chairs. Reporters leaned forward with sharpened attention. Sensing a turn without yet knowing where it lived, Reeve resumed his attack. Even if the fleet carried non-combat equipment, the defendant had lawful alternatives. No, Noah said. It was the first time he had interrupted. Reeve stiffened. Then enlightened the court. Noah stood slowly. There was no lawful alternative fast enough. For what? Noah looked once at Mara. Not for approval. For courage, maybe. Or witness. Or a child who would have died before permission paperwork cleared Earth's fear of headlines. Silence moved through the room in visible waves. Reeve lifted his chin. Human child? No. A murmur broke in the gallery. Judge Ortega rapped once for order. Proceed carefully, Commander. Noah did. 3 months ago, our patrol recovered an escape pod drifting near the outer debris lane. It carried a single Oran child, female, approximately 6 years old, with severe pressure trauma and internal freezing. Pirates had attacked a diplomatic vessel beyond the line. If the Oran government learned one of their children had died in our custody while we waited to negotiate access, they would have sent a retrieval armada. Not because of war, because parents do not process grief through policy. His hands remained at his sides, but Mara knew how hard he was holding himself together. She needed the nearest compatible medical gate. That gate was 11 minutes across the border. Reeve stepped in at once. And you expect this court to believe you violated military command for compassion? Noah's expression did not change. I expect the court to believe I could count her breaths. The judge's pen stopped moving. Reeve tried again. Why hide this from your own government? Because there were already leaks in command. The pirates had help. If the child's identity spread, she would become leverage before she became well. Mara watched the courtroom absorb it. Not the politics. The image. A dying child. A man counting breaths. On the second row, one of the older reporters quietly lowered her pen. That night, church bells from St. Gabriel's carried through the wet streets while Mara drove to collect Ivy. The child was asleep in the back seat in her angel costume, one paper wing bent under her shoulder, a smear of glitter across her nose. Mrs. Alvarez handed over a plastic bag with costume pieces and a folded drawing. She made this while waiting for you, the teacher said softly. Rough day? Mara nodded. Mrs. Alvarez touched the roof of the car and smiled with the tired kindness of women who kept other people's children steady. She asked again whether lonely men are always guilty. Mara looked down at the drawing after they pulled away at the light. 3 figures stood beneath a church bell. One woman, one child, one tall man without a face yet. Above them, badly drawn stars. In the corner, a ship near a line made in red crayon, and on the back, in Ivy's careful print. Maybe he was bringing someone home. Mara had to pull over by the park because she could no longer see clearly enough to drive. Rain ticked against the windshield. In the dark trees beyond, Christmas bulbs hung like patient fruit. Ivy stirred in the back seat. Mama, I'm here. Did the judge decide? Not yet. Ivy rubbed her eyes. The man in the picture. Did he look at you today? Mara gripped the steering wheel. Yes. Did you look back? Children always skip straight to the dangerous part. Yes. Ivy was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, was he the someone you loved? Mara turned in her seat. There was no good age for truth. Only the age it arrived. Yes, she said. Ivy sat up, hair tangled from sleep, paper wing crackling under her. Is he my dad? The rain seemed to stop, though it hadn't. Mara opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded. Ivy watched her carefully, not crying, not smiling, just thinking. Does he know? He does now. Oh, Ivy leaned back. That's why you look like your stomach hurt. Mara laughed through tears she had lost the strength to hide. Yes. Is he mean? No. Then why wasn't he there? Mara looked toward the park lights, each one blurred by rain. Because sometimes life breaks in the wrong place, and people spend years standing on opposite sides of it. Ivy considered that with the solemn mercy children occasionally lent adults. That sounds fixable. The next morning the sky stayed gray, but the rain eased into mist. Courthouse security was heavier now. Someone had leaked enough of the previous evening's testimony to turn the hearing into public obsession. By 10 o'clock, an unexpected witness had arrived. Ambassador Siratal of the Oran Commonwealth entered in ceremonial blue, 4 attendants behind her, and the air in the room changed. Even Judge Ortega sat straighter. The ambassador spoke in measured Earth standard, her voice almost musical. Commander Vale returned one of our children alive. He violated a border. He did not violate peace. Reeve tried to salvage ground. With respect, Ambassador, our issue is not gratitude. It is unauthorized military movement. Sarah Tall inclined her head. Then let your issue remain small. Ours would not have. A sound moved through the gallery. Not laughter exactly, but close. She continued. The child he returned was the daughter of a deceased envoy. As she died hidden in your custody, there would be morning fleets at this planet's edge by now. Not for conquest, for reclamation. Your commander prevented a funeral from becoming history. Judge Ortega asked the only question that mattered. Was there hostile activation from Commander Vale's fleet? None, the ambassador said. His weapons slept. Mara closed her eyes for half a second. Weapons slept. It would be on every evening report before sunset. During recess, the children's choir from St. Luke's was brought into the courthouse rotunda for the annual winter charity concert, long scheduled before any of this happened. Security had argued against it. Tradition had won. Ivy stood in the front row with her coat buttoned wrong and her halo slightly crooked. She searched the room until she found Mara near the back. Then her gaze shifted. Noah was standing beyond the stone pillar with 2 officers near him, free now of the formal restraints, though not yet of judgment. He looked exactly like a man trying not to move too quickly toward the center of his own life. The piano began. The children sang. Their voices rose into the old dome, imperfect and bright and brave enough not to care. Ivy sang louder than she had at rehearsal. Halfway through the second verse she stopped, looked directly at Noah, and held up her paper star. He stared at it, then at her face, and Mara saw recognition happen in pieces. The shape of the eyes, the stubborn mouth, the way she stood with one foot slightly turned out when nervous. No officer interrupted. No clerk coughed. Even the reporters kept their distance, because some moments were too human to survive being handled. After the song, Ivy slipped from the line and walked to him before anyone could decide whether to prevent it. She stopped an arm's length away. Hello, she said. Noah swallowed. Hello. You're taller than the picture. A helpless smile broke across his face. I've been told. She looked at him for another long second, then held out the star. You can keep this until the judge is done. His hand shook when he took it. Thank you. It's not because I trust you yet, Ivy said. It's because Mama says people should hold something delicate when they're trying to behave. Mara covered her mouth. Noah let out a breath that sounded half laugh, half grief. Your mother is very wise. She also burns toast. Then she's definitely your mother. That did it. Ivy smiled first. Small, careful, but real. When the final session resumed, the room felt different. Not softer. Truer. Judge Ortega read for several minutes from treaty provisions, emergency exemptions, command protocols, and the narrow, brutal hallway the law sometimes forced good intentions to walk through. No one interrupted her. At last, she looked at Noah. This court finds no evidence that Commander Vale intended aggression, nor that Earth sent hostile force beyond the Accord line. The incursion was limited, non-combative, and tied to immediate preservation of life. On the greater accusation, the court finds for the defense. The breath left the room all at once. Reeve lowered his eyes. But the judge was not finished. However, she said, civilization survives not only on mercy, but on structure. Commander Vale knowingly bypassed command authority. For that, this court issues formal censure and suspends active command pending review. Let history record both truths at once. You broke the rule. You did not break the peace. Noah nodded. Understood, Your Honor. The gavel came down. People moved immediately, chairs scraping, voices returning, cameras rushing to catch whichever version of justice they preferred to sell before dinner. Through all of it, Noah remained still for one strange quiet moment, as if he no longer trusted the ground to keep doing what ground was supposed to do. Then he turned and found Mara and Ivy. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The square shone wet beneath the Christmas lights. Every branch in the courthouse park strung with white bulbs. Church bells from St. Gabriel's began the evening hour, and the sound crossed the city like a blessing too old to feel embarrassed by the word. Mara stood beneath a bare tree while Ivy kicked at a puddle with the toe of her boot. Noah approached slowly, not like a man claiming anything, but like one asking whether there was still a road. He stopped in front of Ivy first. I don't know what you've been told about me, he said. Ivy folded her arms. Not enough. That's fair. He crouched so they were eye level. I should have been there sooner. You didn't know. No. He glanced up once at Mara, then back at his daughter. But if you let me, I'd like to know now. Ivy studied him with the unnerving seriousness of children deciding whether to open the door to hope. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the folded drawing from the car, the one with the unfinished man under the church bell. I left your face blank, she said, in case you were disappointing. Noah nodded as if this were a reasonable artistic policy. Very wise. She handed him a crayon from the same pocket. You can earn features gradually. Mara laughed before she could stop herself, and Noah looked up at the sound as though he had been walking toward it for years. He took the crayon and, balanced awkwardly against his knee, drew two eyes and a crooked smile onto the paperman. Not perfect, just present. Ivy approved with a small nod. Okay, she said. We can get cocoa, but not peas. Agreed, Noah said solemnly. They began walking toward the church market at the end of the square, where vendors sold roasted chestnuts, wool scarves, carved toys, and the kind of ornaments people bought when they wanted proof that tenderness still had a place in the world. Halfway there, Mara touched Noah's sleeve. He turned. She held out the old letter, now refolded along its original lines. Keep it this time. He took it with care. For a second, neither of them spoke. There were too many possible speeches, and none of them belonged in the cold with a child listening and bells overhead. At last he said, I don't know what second chances are supposed to look like. Mara glanced at Ivy, who was already arguing with a vendor about the proper number of marshmallows in winter cocoa. Probably not polished. No, he said. You always hated polished. I hated false. His gaze stayed on her. Then I won't bring you false. That was not a promise of forever. It was smaller, better, something people could carry. Ivy ran back with two wooden ornament hooks tangled around her glove and an expression of deep complaint. He says one cocoa each. This is corruption. Noah took the hooks from her gently. I'll represent you on appeal. She brightened at once. You know court words. A few. Good. Mama uses them when she's angry at parking tickets. Mara gave him a look. He smiled, and this time it stayed. Later, when the market lights softened and the church doors opened for the night service, Ivy slipped her hand into Mara's on one side and Noah's on the other, as if she had decided the arrangement on behalf of everyone. Neither adult corrected her. Inside, candles flickered against old stone. People removed wet coats, whispered greetings, settled into pews. The choir began somewhere near the front. Outside, the city still carried arguments, cameras, and the aftertaste of public judgment. Inside, there was only warmth, wax, pine, and the low rustle of people making room. Noah stood beside them beneath the familiar bell he had once promised to return under. He had, not on time, not cleanly, not without damage, but he had come back carrying proof that a rule could be broken without love being abandoned, that mercy sometimes arrived wearing censure, and that families were not always made in the order people planned. Sometimes they were made in rain, sometimes in court, sometimes in the long, ordinary courage of staying after the truth finally arrived. When Ivy leaned against his arm halfway through the hymn, Noah closed his eyes for just a moment and lowered his head toward hers as if listening for something he had missed years ago and could still, by grace, learn now. Mara watched them in the candlelight. Then she stepped closer, and when the bells began again above the winter city, no one standing near them could have said exactly when the distance ended